No one showed up for my son's surgery, not even my mom. A week later, she asked me for $2.5K for my brother. I sent 50 cents with "You're cut off." The next morning, my phone lit up like hell. First call was from my furious dad. The morning after my daughter's surgery, my phone lit up so hard it buzzed itself off the counter. I thought it was someone finally checking on her, finally asking if she survived the night. But when I picked it up, the first message on the screen wasn't concern. It was from my mother. "Your sister needs $3,000. You always help. Send it today." That was it. No, "How's Emma?" No, "How did the operation go?" Not even a fake "Hope everything is okay." Just the demand. I stared at it, standing there in my quiet apartment in Columbus, the heater clicking in the corner, my kid asleep in the next room with fresh stitches across her abdomen. I don't know how to explain what snapped inside me, but something sharp broke clean. I sent her $1 with the memo. "We're done." Then I put my phone face down on the counter like it was something toxic. It should have felt good. Or final, or something. Instead, I felt this coldness spread through me, like the moment before a storm hits when everything goes still and wrong. 20 minutes later, the calls started. Then the texts. Then an email from a lawyer whose name I didn't recognize. And that was when the real panic kicked in, because it hit me that they weren't trying to contact me out of guilt or worry or any kind of conscience. No, they were circling. They wanted something, something big, all while my daughter, my 9-year-old baby, had gone through an emergency appendectomy alone except for the one person my family always mocked. My great-aunt Diane. The weird one, the spinster, the shame of the family, the one they only invited to holidays out of obligation. She was the only one who showed up. She slept in the plastic hospital chair. She held Emma's hand when the anesthesia kicked in. She brought me food when I hadn't eaten in almost a day. Everyone else, silence. Not one call, not one text, not one goddamn message. I should have been focused on my daughter recovering, but the non-stop buzzing wouldn't stop. And when I finally checked the voicemail from the unknown number, my stomach dropped so fast I had to brace myself on the sink. It wasn't a scammer. It wasn't a wrong number. It was a lawyer, my father's lawyer. And he said, calm and rehearsed, that he was calling to discuss my required continuation of payments toward something called the Family Property Fund. Required, payments, fund, words I had never heard before in my life. He said if I stopped, the consequences would impact several family members. I hung up. He called back. I didn't answer. More texts, more missed calls, then a long message from my father. "You can't just walk away from this." We all agreed. "Your share keeps your sister's house afloat. You're putting us in a terrible position." And suddenly everything clicked in the most sickening way. The silence during my daughter's hospital stay wasn't just apathy, it was strategy. They weren't ignoring me because they didn't care. They were ignoring me because they already assumed I'd keep paying. Because in their minds, I was an ATM with a pulse. Because they thought as long as I stayed scared and obedient, they could bleed me dry. But they didn't know something. They didn't know who had been sitting in my living room that morning. They didn't know Aunt Diane wasn't just the harmless oddball. They didn't know she knew something, a secret, about my family that she'd been keeping for years. And when she walked out of the hallway holding a file folder with my father's handwriting on it, a folder she said she had been waiting 10 years to show me, I realized something unbelievably dark. This wasn't just about money. This was about a lie. A massive one my parents never expected to surface. And the second she opened that folder, I knew my family was about to regret ever leaving us alone in that hospital. Growing up in Dayton, my family ran like a machine. You could hear the gears grinding if you listened close enough. Everything revolved around image. Clean front porch, perfect holiday cards, matching outfits for church. My mom, Carol, was the kind of woman who could weaponize a smile. My dad, Robert, had two moods, silent disappointment or pointed criticism. And my older sister, Melanie, was their pride project from birth. I was the extra, the responsible one, the good kid, but not in a way that made anyone proud, more like the kind of good that made me useful. I learned early that if I didn't show up for them, nobody would show up for me. By the time I was 19, my role in the family was already locked in. I worked part-time, picked up my sister's kids, babysat for free, drove my mom to her appointments, and helped my dad with the mountains of paperwork he always forgot to do. Meanwhile, Melanie floated around like a balloon with a trust fund, jobs that lasted a few months, boyfriends who lasted a few weeks, but always the family favorite. Whenever she made a mess, I was expected to clean it. And stupidly, I did. Then I got pregnant with Emma during my senior year of college. Her father disappeared faster than morning fog. My family didn't say congratulations. They didn't offer help. They didn't even hide their judgment. My mom's exact words were, "Well, you made your bed." My dad didn't speak to me for almost a month. But when Emma was born, something changed, not in them, but in me. Suddenly, I wasn't bending over backward for their approval anymore. I had a baby to raise, a degree to finish, and no room for their drama. And they hated that shift. Because once I started telling them no, even gently, they acted like I'd committed a crime. Still, I kept trying to maintain the peace. I showed up for holidays. I helped with chores. I picked up shifts at work and helped pay for things they couldn't cover, like when my parents were helping Melanie buy her first house and needed me to temporarily contribute to the down payment. Temporary turned into monthly. Monthly turned into "you're part of this now." And somehow, within a year, I was paying more toward their house than I was toward my own rent. Every time I brought it up, they dismissed it. Family helps family. You know your sister needs it. We're all pitching in. But I never saw anyone pitch in but me. And Aunt Diane, she was the only person who said something the whole time. I still remember that afternoon 9 years ago, sitting at her little bungalow in the Old North neighborhood. She poured me iced tea and said in her blunt, almost uncomfortable honesty, "They're using you, honey. One day you're going to wake up and realize you've raised a child and a family that never lifted a finger for you." At the time, I brushed it off. I said things like, "It's not that bad, and they don't have anyone else, and it's only temporary." God, I cringe thinking about how naive I was. Then 2 years ago, when money got tighter because Emma's asthma treatments got worse and bills piled up, I told my parents I needed a break from contributing. Not permanently, just a few months. My father didn't see it that way. He sent me a text so long I had to scroll. "This is a commitment you made. Melanie depends on this. We all do. You need to be responsible." Responsible, responsible. That word became a chain around my ankle. And the worst part? I kept paying anyway. Not because I wanted to, not because I agreed, but because I was terrified of losing whatever scraps of acceptance my family gave me. Until Emma's appendix burst. Until I spent the longest night of my life in a hospital room where the only person holding me together was Diane. Until I realized that my family's silence wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, a habit, a choice. They'd been abandoning me for years. I was just too busy catching their weight to notice. And now, with that folder Diane brought out, my father's handwriting, my mother's signatures, and a decade worth of secrets, I understood something chilling. My family hadn't just been using me. They'd been building something on my back, and it was about to collapse. I didn't sleep the night Diane handed me that folder. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car rolling down our street in Columbus. Emma was asleep in her room, her little body curled around the stuffed fox she'd had since she was a toddler. Diane was in the guest room, door cracked just enough that I could see the warm glow of her reading lamp. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing like it was possessed. Blocked numbers, voicemails, emails from the lawyer, texts from my mother that said things like, "You're blowing this way out of proportion. We did our best with Emma. Your sister is in a very bad place. You should feel ashamed." Not one mention of my daughter's surgery, not one question about how she was healing, not even a fake apology. Their panic was rising, and I could feel it. It had a smell to it, desperation mixed with entitlement. Around 2 a.m., Diane came out of her room wearing her oversized Ohio State sweatshirt and sat beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just took the folder from the coffee table and opened it again. "Your father lied to you," she said softly, matter of fact. And not just a normal lie, a calculated one. I felt my stomach twist. What is this fund? Why am I apparently responsible for it? She tapped the first page with her finger. "Because 10 years ago, they put your name down as a contributing member to the family property account." "Without telling you," I blinked. "But that doesn't make sense. They can't just—" "Oh, they can't," she said. "But that never stopped your parents before." She flipped to another line, one highlighted in yellow. Property benefit allocation. Equal, mandatory, non-negotiable contributions from all listed members. Listed members. I read the names: my father, my mother, my sister, and me. No signature from me, no initials, nothing. I felt sick. She slid another page toward me, one that showed the timeline of payments. My name was listed every month. Every payment they'd guilted me into sending. All filed under voluntary contributions, except they weren't voluntary. Not formally, not legally, but they were using them to build a paper trail that made it look like I'd agreed to this long term. It was deception disguised as routine. A trap created slowly, quietly, in broad daylight. My throat felt tight. Why didn't you tell me this before? Diane hesitated, and for the first time in years, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because I hoped they'd stop before it got this bad. I didn't realize how far they'd go. But when you called me from the hospital, I knew. Knew what? That they'd finally crossed the line even they used to pretend they wouldn't cross, she said softly. Leaving you alone with a sick child to protect their own financial mess. That wasn't ignorance, that was strategy. That word again. Strategy. My family wasn't bumbling or clueless. They were calculating, and once the idea took hold, I couldn't shake it. The next morning, I woke up to another blow. 2 emails, one from my father's lawyer, one from my sister. The lawyer's was stiff, formal, and full of veiled threats disguised as urgency. My sister's was worse. We're behind because of you. Stop pretending Emma's surgery was an emergency. Appendixes burst all the time. Families don't fall apart over minor things. Mom said you're being dramatic. Fix this. My jaw locked so hard it hurt. The lack of compassion wasn't shocking anymore. The cruelty was almost expected. But that last line, fix this, like I was the one who created their debt, their foreclosure warnings, their financial collapse, like I hadn't spent years holding them up. The breaking point wasn't their words. It was the realization behind them. They still believed I would cave. They still believed I was the same scared daughter who put her own needs last. They still believed I'd pay, even after everything. They didn't know I wasn't that person anymore. They didn't know the folder had changed everything. They didn't know Diane was about to uncover a secret that would make the entire foundation of their little system crumble. And they sure as hell didn't know what was coming next. I thought I'd already hit the bottom of what my family was capable of. The manipulation, the guilt, the silence during Emma's surgery, the lawyer, the threats about the family property fund. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the truth Diane showed me next. It was a Saturday morning. Emma was on the couch wrapped in her green blanket, half watching cartoons, half dozing. Diane brewed coffee the way she always did, loudly, like she wanted me fully awake before she said what she had to say. She set a mug in front of me, then placed the folder between us. There's something in here I didn't show you last night, she said. My stomach tightened. Why? Because you'd just come out of the worst week of your life, and I wasn't sure if you were ready to see it. I braced myself. I'm ready now. She didn't speak. She just opened the folder to a photocopied document with my full name printed in all caps. A document titled, Designation of Future Guardian. My breath stopped in my chest. I read the line beneath it once, then twice, then a third time because it was impossible to understand the first two. In the event of incapacity, hospitalization, or financial destabilization, minor Emma Collins will be placed in the temporary guardianship of Melanie Harper. My sister. My sister, the woman who didn't even text during Emma's emergency surgery. My sister, the woman who was drowning in debt and blaming me for it. My sister, the one who treated my daughter like an afterthought her entire life. Diane watched my face carefully. Do you understand what this means? My voice came out small. They tried to pre-assign custody of my daughter. Not tried, she said softly. Succeeded. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table. That's not legal, I whispered. I never signed anything. Diane pushed another sheet toward me. You did, except you didn't. There it was. A shaky, uneven, slanted version of my signature at the bottom of the document. A signature I had never written. I felt nausea crawl up my throat. They forged my name. Yes, she said quietly, and they filed it. They actually filed it. I stared at the page like it was a bomb. Filed, meaning official. Meaning recognized. Meaning if something had gone wrong during Emma's surgery, if I had fainted, seized, passed out, she would have been taken. Given to them, to Melanie. My hands shook. They were planning for something to happen to me, I said. Or hoping for it. Diane didn't argue. She didn't have to. The truth hung between us like smoke. My family, my own parents, my own sister weren't just using me financially. They were planning for my failure, preparing for it, positioning themselves to take the one thing that mattered most to me. And then Diane dropped the quiet, devastating blow. This wasn't recent. This was 6 months ago. My heart lurched. 6 months, she nodded. Right around the time Emma's asthma attacks got worse. Right when you were going to urgent care every other week. My ears rang. I remembered that time. The exhaustion, the hospital visits, the panic. I remembered my mother telling me I was overreacting. My father telling me to get a grip. My sister saying, maybe Emma just needs a more stable environment. My God, they weren't just being dismissive. They were testing the waters. They were waiting for something to happen to me. They were preparing to swoop in if I cracked under the stress. But the worst part, the gut punch that made me sit back like someone had slapped me, was the signature date. 2 days before Emma's appendix ruptured. I looked at Diane, my voice barely a whisper. They knew I was getting overwhelmed. They knew I had no support. They knew Emma was sick and I was exhausted. And instead of helping, they made plans to take her if I collapsed. Diane put her hand over mine. They weren't planning to help you. They were planning to replace you. And before I could even process that, before I could breathe, my phone vibrated with a new text from my mother. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand, and you're about to make this much worse for yourself. The timing wasn't an accident. They knew I was starting to uncover the truth, and now I knew something too. My family's betrayal hadn't started with money. It started long before that, and it was much, much darker. I didn't answer my mother's text. I didn't call back the lawyer. I didn't open the 6 unread messages from my sister that came in while I stared at that forged signature. Instead, I walked into the hallway, leaned my head against the wall and breathed. Slow, controlled. Because the reality hit me all at once. If something had gone wrong during Emma's operation, if I had collapsed or panicked or even momentarily stepped out of the room, my family was prepared to take her. Not help me, not support me. Take her, and they'd already laid the paperwork for it. My knees nearly buckled, but Diane's voice anchored me. We're not panicking, she said. We're planning. Her calmness was unnatural, almost frightening. As if she'd been preparing for this moment far longer than I realized. She sat at the dining table with the folder spread open, her glasses sitting at the end of her nose. The good news is, they got sloppy. Very sloppy. I couldn't stop pacing. They forged my name, they filed it. They tried to set things up so they could take Emma. How is there good news in any of that? Diane pointed at the signature. Because they forged it badly. I froze. She leaned back in her chair. Your sister is careless, always has been. And your mother, well, she assumes nobody will ever question her. They didn't use the right pen. They didn't match the curve of your signature. They didn't mimic pressure. And best of all, they picked a date you can easily dispute. I swallowed hard. So what do we do? Diane looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on her before, sharp, deliberate, unflinching. We make a record, a loud one. She slid a notebook toward me. From this moment on, she said, everything they do goes into documentation. Every call, every text, every voicemail, every threat. Every attempt to contact Emma. My breath hitched. The school incident. Exactly, she said. Your mother tried to pick her up without authorization. That's a security breach, and we're going to use it. My mind reeled. You think this is going to hold up? Oh, honey, Diane said with a grim, almost fierce smile, we're going to make it impossible to ignore. She laid out the plan like someone who'd spent years imagining this moment. Step 1. Scan every document in the folder. Every forged signature. Every date. Every line. Step 2. Create a detailed timeline of every medical visit, every time the family refused to help, every attempt they made to pressure money out of me. Step 3. Submit an updated custody and emergency contact order with the school and local police. Not against my parents by name, just as a protective adjustment due to a custody concern. Step 4. Contact a family lawyer, not to start a full case, but to file a notarized statement that I am aware of an unauthorized guardianship document submitted without my consent. Step 5. Wait. Wait for my family to slip. Wait for them to panic. Wait for them to reveal exactly how far they'd go. Because desperation makes people stupid, and they were already unraveling. While Diane typed up the timeline, I pulled out my phone. New messages were flooding in. My dad's lawyer sent a stern email demanding resolution. My sister left a voice message with fake anger trembling under real fear. But it was my mother's newest text that made my blood run cold. If you don't come to the house tomorrow, we're going to have to involve people you don't want involved. People, not lawyers, not police, not authorities, people. Diane read the text over my shoulder and exhaled slowly. There it is. There what is? I whispered. The threat, she said. The one we needed, the one that proves intention, the one that shows they're not just acting out of confusion. They're acting out of entitlement. I felt chilled. What do we do now? I asked. Diane closed the folder with a soft thud. Now, she said, we set the trap, and we let them walk straight into it. I was expecting the next move from my family to be loud, another lawyer email, another guilt-drenched message, maybe even another stunt like my mother showing up at Emma's school. But what happened next wasn't loud. It was silent, calculated, chilling. Monday morning started normal enough. I took Emma to school, came home, and found Diane already in the kitchen flipping pancakes like she'd lived here her whole life. She handed me a plate without a word, just a knowing look that said, "Today's going to be something." She wasn't wrong. At 10:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call from a different number, then another, and another. 4 calls, 4 different numbers, 1 minute apart. I felt my heart thud painfully in my chest. That's them. Don't answer, Diane said, calm as ever. Let the voicemail incriminate them. But the 5th call wasn't from a random number. It was from Emma's aftercare coordinator. My stomach dropped. I snatched the phone up so fast I nearly threw it. Hello, is Emma? Oh. No, she's okay, the woman said quickly. I'm calling because a man came in this morning asking questions about her file. A man. All the air disappeared from the room. What kind of questions? I managed to force out. He said he was confirming pickup permissions, she said. But he didn't have ID. When we asked him which student he was referencing, he said, and I quote, my granddaughter. Except he didn't know her last name. I felt my knees go weak. A man, claiming Emma was his granddaughter, not knowing her last name. My father had never once called Emma his granddaughter out loud, never once visited the school, never once picked her up, never once helped. He wouldn't slip on her last name. So who the hell had they sent? I swallowed hard. Did he try to leave with her? No, she said. He left when we told him we were calling you to verify. He walked out fast. Almost ran. Diane stood from her chair so sharply it scraped against the floor. Her face lost all its color. This isn't them panicking, she said. This is escalation. I ended the call and just stood there, gripping the phone like it might explode. How would they even get someone to do that? I whispered. Diane didn't answer right away. She walked to the drawer by the fridge, pulled out the folder, flipped through the pages, then stopped at one of the documents I hadn't paid much attention to earlier. A name, small, written in neat handwriting in the corner. Property consultant. Marcus Hale. My entire body froze. Who's that? I asked, Diane's jaw clenched. Your father's little side project, some fixer he used years ago when he was in over his head with debt. A fixer. A man who handled problems. A man who suddenly showed up at my daughter's school. He would have done it for money, Diane said, or to repay a favor. I felt sick. He tried to get information about Emma. He tried to figure out how to reach her. Diane didn't sugarcoat it. He was checking how easy she would be to take. The room tilted. They weren't just pressuring me financially. They weren't just planning to exploit me. They weren't just forging documents. They were preparing for something bigger, something more dangerous, something that would make everything else make sense. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why go this far? Why involve a stranger? Why try to get to Emma? Diane hesitated, really hesitated for the first time since this started. That's the part I didn't want to believe, she said. She pulled out another sheet, a bank statement, one with numbers that made my head spin. My parents weren't just in debt. They were hundreds of thousands of dollars underwater. And the property fund? It wasn't a fund, it was collateral. And Emma, my child, was their leverage. Everything clicked at once, horrifying and crystal clear. They weren't trying to take Emma because they loved her. They were trying to take her because Someone dangerous wanted something in return. Diane looked at me with a hollow expression. "Honey," she whispered, "this wasn't about family. They never intended to raise her. They were planning to trade her." My stomach dropped so violently I had to grip the counter. "Trade her for what?" "For their freedom," she said. And for the first time in my life, I realized. My family wasn't just selfish. They were sick. They were capable of things I never imagined. And they weren't done, not even close. The chilling truth behind why they did it. I didn't move for what felt like an entire minute. My brain refused to process the words Diane had just said. Trade her. Trade Emma. For a long time, I thought my parents were just selfish people with no emotional capacity. Narcissistic, manipulative, cruel in quiet, socially acceptable ways. But this was something else, something colder, something I didn't have a name for yet. "Explain," I finally whispered, barely able to get the word out. Diane took a breath, slow and steady, like she was preparing to drag a corpse out of the ground. "You know your father," she said, "and you know he's always been reckless with money. What you don't know is how long he's been hiding how deep the hole really is." I blinked. "The mortgage, Melanie's house, the loans," she shook her head. "No, that's pocket change compared to what he's really into." She slid a stack of papers toward me, a mix of bank statements, letters, photocopied emails. The kind of thing you only collect when you've been watching someone for a long, long time. Diane had been watching. "Your father," she said carefully, "took out a private loan about 8 years ago. Not from a bank, not from a credit union. From a man named Hale's organization." My stomach twisted. "The same man who showed up at the school?" "No," she said. "Marcus Hale isn't the lender, he's the messenger, the collector. Your father borrowed from the kind of people who don't call credit agencies, the kind who don't negotiate, the kind who come for flesh when money runs out." I felt numb. "How much?" She turned the page. $246,000. My breath caught. "What, why? Why would he?" "Because he wanted to hide Melanie's first foreclosure," she said bluntly. "She was about to lose the house before she even moved in. Your parents were terrified of the embarrassment, so your father made a deal. A deal that had interest rates so high it practically guaranteed he would drown. And when he couldn't pay," Diane continued quietly, "he offered future collateral." I felt the world tilt. "Collateral," I whispered. She looked at me, not dramatically, not softly, but with the kind of brutal honesty that cuts straight through. "You," she said. "At first, you were 25, no money, overworked, vulnerable. They believed they could push you into something, marry you off, tie you to someone useful. You didn't play along." I stared at her, stomach churning. "When you stopped giving them money," Diane said, "and when you didn't break down the way they expected, they shifted to Emma." My heart slammed against my ribs. "No," I breathed. "No, no, they wouldn't." "They would," Diane said. "And they did." She tapped a final document, a letter, from Hale's organization, dated 3 months ago. It read, "If primary collateral is no longer viable, secondary parties must be made available." Underneath that, in my father's handwriting, "Custody arrangements in process." I covered my mouth with my hands. My fingers trembled so violently I could barely breathe. Diane placed a steady hand on my back. "Honey," she whispered, "your parents weren't planning to raise Emma. They were planning to hand her over as part of an agreement your father made." I felt dizzy. "For what? What could she possibly?" "For leverage," Diane said. "For protection, for bargaining power. You don't want the details. But I will tell you this, they didn't see Emma as a person. They saw her as an asset." Something primal rose in me, a rage so sharp it tasted metallic. My mother's text, my father's lawyer, the forged guardianship document, the stranger at the school. It all formed one horrifying picture. My parents weren't trying to help my sister. They weren't trying to fix their finances. They weren't trying to reconnect with me. They were trying to secure their debt. And Emma, my baby, was their way out. Diane looked at me with fierce, steady eyes. "They didn't just betray you," she said. "They betrayed your child, and for that you owe them nothing. Not your money, not your silence, not your mercy." And in that moment, something hardened inside me, something final. I didn't just want distance anymore. I wanted justice. I wanted every secret exposed, every lie ripped open, every scheme burned to ash. And I wanted them to feel every ounce of the fear they had planned for me. The night I learned the truth, the whole truth, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart the way my parents had probably predicted. I just sat there at my dining table in Columbus with Diane across from me and felt something go very still inside my chest. Whatever remained of the daughter they thought they owned, whatever soft spot they believed they could still manipulate, whatever fear they assumed would pull me back in, it all died in that moment. And something sharper took its place. I looked at Diane. How do we end this? She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She just handed me her laptop. We end it by making them answer to the one thing they fear most, she said, losing control. That night, we filed 4 things. 1. A formal fraud report regarding the forged guardianship document. 2. A notarized statement outlining the attempted unauthorized school pickup incident. 3. A financial protection order, locking every account with my name anywhere near it. 4. A custody declaration, stating Emma was not to be removed from my care under any circumstances. By morning, every step was legally documented, time-stamped, irreversible, and that was just phase 1. Phase 2 required a level of calm I didn't know I had. I sent one message to my parents, my sister, and the lawyer. All communications must be in writing. All further attempts to involve my daughter in your financial dealings will be reported. Do not contact me or Emma again. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. My mother called 12 times, blocked. My father emailed a storm of angry paragraphs, archived. My sister sent voice notes crying about family loyalty, deleted. They weren't panicking because they cared about me. They were panicking because the leverage they needed, the child they planned to trade, was gone. And then came the final blow. Diane had quietly been preparing something I didn't know about, something she'd been collecting for years. Old paperwork, shady financial transfers, names written in the corners of documents, letters my father hoped no one kept, emails he thought he'd deleted. She handed me a sealed envelope. This, she said, is what ends them. Inside was a collection of evidence proving my father wasn't just in debt. He'd been funneling money through a side business to hide how deep into Hale's organization he'd sunk. Enough to trigger an automatic investigation once submitted. I stared at Diane. Why didn't you use this sooner? Because I wasn't the one they tried to hurt, she said quietly. You were. And they crossed the line the moment they forged your name and set their eyes on Emma. We submitted everything anonymously to the State Financial Crimes Unit. Within 48 hours, the dominoes fell. Their accounts froze. Their credit tanked. Their property fund was flagged for investigation. And Hale's organization, they cut ties the second law enforcement became involved. The people my parents were terrified of turned their backs on them. For the first time in my life, the power imbalance shifted, and it shifted hard. By the next week, Melanie and her husband were packing boxes in a panic. My parents' house went eerily quiet, no more threats, no more guilt trips, no more family obligations. They were too busy trying to save themselves. They didn't dare come near us, not with the investigation open, not with their financial cushion gone, not with the risk of criminal charges hanging over their heads. They needed distance from me more than I ever needed it from them. And Emma. She healed, she laughed again. She stopped waking up at night. A month later, during one of our quiet evenings, she drew 3 stick figures on a piece of paper and taped it to the fridge. Me, her, and Diane. Underneath, she wrote in her crooked handwriting, "My real family." Diane cried in the kitchen again, pretending the onions were to blame. And me, I finally understood something I should have known a long time ago. Family isn't blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who stays. Family is who protects you without asking for anything in return. And my final thought, as I closed the door on all of them forever, was simple. They tried to trade my daughter. Instead, they lost everything. Because I didn't get revenge, I got freedom. And that was the one thing they never saw coming.